But when we do think about, we're walking in, what you see first, what you feel first, what you hear first. So it's everything from the music that's going on in the pauses, the music when someone's coming up on stage, the audio visual presentation of things, the types of stages, all those things we try to think about. And I think that shows. I'm not sure what it is exactly, but when we talk to other speakers, and you've probably talked to them as well, they all say they love the energy, and the energy is great. And I have no other way to say that, is that like that's a place that I would have want to be in. And we think about that when orchestrating the conference. And so I guess that makes us unique, I hope.
Ivan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, John.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. I know we've had some of your colleagues from Codeanywhere on the show back in the fall, but this is your first time on Software Engineering Daily, so glad you could be here. Let's start off with an introduction. Who are you? What do you do? And how'd you get to where you are today?
Long introduction. We'll keep it short. I do things around developers, I guess. So from software originally to events and lately DevRel. So it's like basically all around developers and helping make their life easier, I guess. I hope.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I feel like you must wear a ton of hats because you do a whole breadth of things. You're the Chief Development Experience Officer at Infobip, plus the CEO of Codeanywhere, and I'm sure a whole bunch of other things. But we're focusing primarily on one of your accolades, which is the founder of the Infobip Shift Conference. So maybe we could start there. What is the Infobip Shift Conference?
So the conference originally just called Shift, so it's now called Infobip Shift, as Infobip is the company. So Infobip is a cloud communications provider. So if any of you haven't heard of it, they offer one API to be able to send SMS, email, voice. So think of an Uber driver, if he calls you, that goes through Infobip. Anyway, that company is out of Croatia, and they bootstrapped to $1 billion in revenue, which I think is always super impressive. And yeah, so originally Shift, I created in my hometown in Split, Croatia. And I did it because with my own company or startup, I went to other conferences, and they were just like so much fun, so energetic, and nothing like that was in the city where I lived. And so I just wanted to create a super fun conference where people can learn stuff, but also have fun in the sense of, now I couldn't have done it originally, but now there's like, you can drive supercars and you can drink mojitos. You've been in there. And you do all sorts of things. We have like a EDM party when it ends. So I've always tried to incorporate fun and the ability, not just fun on its own, but that's people. I say we try to make serendipity happen so that people actually meet people in a fun environment, but also that you actually have talks that are serious and educational and that people want to listen to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you called out that Infobip bootstrapped to $1 billion. That's one of those like statistics I throw out to people that I meet from time to time, and everybody's of course like completely blown away by that because where I live in the Bay Area, most companies are of course always taking venture capital to get to that stage, let alone like bootstrapping is just like a crazy thing to get all the way to that kind of revenue success, which is really, really awesome. And then so you mentioned that you started this conference in some ways because you enjoyed going to conferences, but there wasn't really anything that was going on in your city or maybe in the country of Croatia at that time. So what was the main goal, sort of to bring people to Croatia, that rather than you having to go out and see them? Like, what was the original inspiration beyond just the locality for creating a conference? Because it's a lot of work to take on.
It's the same amount of work. And had I known, I probably would have done it, because I've done it, I don't know, 16 times up until now. But yeah, the idea was twofold. Is like, one, so Croatia, I think, is like now fairly known in the sense that people travel to Croatia now for like tourism, summer vacations. Game of Thrones one was cool. People learned a lot because two of the main cities were filmed in Croatia. But when I started, like, Croatia was like no one knew where it was. And then also, so it was there was two reasons for it. One, it was to bring people from the world to Croatia to see that it's a nice place, that the people are normal, that, if people actually arrive there, then it's not outside of the realm that they can hire you, work for you, invest in your company, whatever it may be, right? So like you now exist and that place exists because people have been there. But on the other hand, we also try to help people from locality. I was privileged enough that I had a small little company before that could pay that I used funds to pay to travel around the world and go to other conferences. But a lot of people couldn't then. They can't now, but especially then, couldn't afford that. And then when you bring, because our speakers were always from around the world. So when you bring these speakers to a city or country like this, where back then there was no direct connection, I hope it made an impact. I think it made an impact with a lot of people that were for the first time able to meet people like you and say, oh, there is venture capital, for example. I'm not talking about developer tooling currently, but definitely like you can open their eyes at that this exists, because the similarity as for people from, let's say, the US or the Bay Area specifically, don't really comprehend that other places exist until they actually see it. It's vice versa the same. Even though people from this part of the world watch, American TV for the most part, for them it's all TV. That stuff doesn't happen. It's all entertainment, but that stuff does happen. And so actually connecting those two personas together was something that I really wanted to do and was the underlining idea behind it.
Yeah, I think that's great. When you bring things together, it's going to feel much more tangible. It's like when you have that sort of like physical presence to it, it feels suddenly more attainable than something that's like maybe you're only seeing on television or something like that. Like I grew up in a small town in Canada until when as a kid, like the idea of like moving to California or having any connection with the west coast of another country or something like that was completely foreign and seemed completely unachievable. It was just something that existed on television. But then, of course, once you've done that, it doesn't seem like that big a deal. But it takes a little bit of to get there. And I think like bringing those worlds together is great, and it's going to facilitate a lot of innovation. And you started Shift, and then Game of Thrones happened in Croatia. Now there's a boost in tourism. I think by like the transient properties, the tourism industry in Croatia probably owes you a little bit of a kickback because you started this all.
Well, they actually helped out, to be honest. So when we were struggling, so the first 3 years, we actually lost money on the conference. So the first 3 were in the red. And actually I forget which agencies it was specifically, but part of it was from tourism. They didn't give a lot, but they did sponsor it with what they could, which we appreciated at the time. It was great because us as the conference organizer needed as much funds as we could to make that happen, right? Now we have great sponsors that come, like, the ones that you see in normal developer conferences, Red Hat, Microsoft, Docker, whoever, and now that part is not an issue, but 13 years ago or 12 years ago is when it started. It was very much a struggle to get those companies to sponsor us. So yeah, they actually did help us a bit. So I thank them for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then what do you think is unique about the conference versus, other developer conferences that you've been to?
I don't know. I mean, I should probably ask you more than ask me. I don't know. I tried to bring myself in as much as I can. Myself in the sense of what I would like at conferences and what I like to do at conferences. So people usually, and that's interesting, right? So developer conferences are actually very specific that usually the seats are full and people are inside listening. You have other tech conferences where it's not that much, or it's like you have seats full, but you have that many more people on the outside, like networking and moving together. And I'm more of like the networking part. So I personally like the content that you can consume on a conference, you can probably watch on YouTube on the flight home. And I think the power of the conference is actually meeting the people, because we were all unfortunately in the pandemic, and then there was like a time when people thought conferences will only be virtual, right? It'll only be like this, like what you and me are talking about right now. There is, as you mentioned a minute ago, something in that physical presence of meeting people. And I think that's a huge part of the value. And I try to make that, as enjoyable as possible. And we think about that probably more than about the content. I think So we really do think about that as much as we can. Like, how will it feel to walk in the door, or how does it feel? And sometimes it might not look great, and sometimes it's constraints that are outside of our power, usually budget, which is a constraint. But what we try, when we do think about, we're walking in, what you see first, what you feel first, what you hear first. So it's everything from the music that's going on in the pauses, the music when someone's coming up on stage, the audio visual presentation of things, the types of stages, all those things we try to think about. And I think that shows. I'm not sure what it is exactly, but when we talk to other speakers, and you've probably talked to them as well, they all say they love the energy, and the energy is great. And I have no other way to say that, is that like, that's a place that I would have want to be in. And we think about that when orchestrating the conference. And so I guess that makes us unique, I hope.
Yeah, I think definitely, as I haven't been as so much as an attendee, but as a speaker, I think it's definitely a unique experience where it feels like there's a lot of attention to detail to actually bring speakers together and kind of create like a whole experience for them, where, there's like, networking opportunities. You end up building a community within essentially the subset of the people who are speaking there. It feels very welcoming in a place where you want to come back and speak at. And I've spoken at a lot of conferences over the years, and a lot of times it's just like, you show up to do your speaking gig, you kind of don't really know where you're going, like you're kind of left your own devices, and you don't necessarily have that connective tissue to the other speakers. And connecting with the other speakers also gives you connections to the audience that's there as well. And then you can feed off that energy, and you get to meet lots of people. So, and those are relationships that I've taken, continued to build and beyond just the conference in terms of, working relationships or other opportunities that I've pursued. So I think there's definitely some secret sauce that's going on there. I don't know exactly what it is. Maybe it's just the attention to detail to the networking piece. And I also think that, like you were saying, there was a world for the last few years where a lot was virtual. And, I think that's a decent Band-Aid, and it helps, sometimes with people who can't afford to travel certain places. I get it, but it's hard to substitute something like, seeing like a giraffe in person versus watching it on television. Like, it's a completely different experience. Or, the difference between, I don't know, like listening to your favorite band or watching even their concert on YouTube versus being there in person. That's going to be a very, very different experience for somebody.
I think that we don't, like, as a society, we generally don't appreciate, and I don't want to get too philosophical, but just like energy. So there's a different energy, right? Like, if we were in the same room, the energy would be slightly different. But like, we do like, a proper high hug, like, how are you, whatever. Here, it's like, there's this sort of filter or barrier between that. And so you can't replicate that any other way for now, until you reverse him. And to your point about speakers, and I recall this now that you mentioned it, like I have spoken at other conferences, and they weren't the same. Although I don't know what it's like to be a speaker at Shift, because I was never like a speaker in that sense. But we were always trying to make sure like that they were comfortable, like the speakers were comfortable, that someone will pick them up and all that. Because the worst thing in the world is when you land in a country that you don't know. And so Croatia, we started in Croatia, now we're doing the UN in Miami. But Croatia, like, a lot of people that were trying to travel to the region would call me up and like, is it safe? Like, for people listening, it's super safe. Like, you can walk out midnight, 1 a.m. It's super safe, but you still don't know. So like, landing at an airport and, trying to figure out how to get a taxi or whatever might not be the most comfortable experience. So like, let's offset that remove that for the speaker, have someone pick them up, drive them to the hotel. And the hotels we try to have like 4 or 5 star, depending on what we can get. But it's like, you want people to be comfortable because they're doing you a service as well. So speakers, you've spoken at a lot of conferences, and obviously you have value as a speaker because you get to talk about, whatever interests you, and you grow your social presence. But you're also doing a service to the organizers, because a lot of conferences, you have community conferences in general that are just trying to, like non-profit in the sense, but there are conferences that are serious profit generators. And for you to be able to go and sort of help them make a profit, if you're talking about that, and that you're not treated in the best possible manner, for me, it was never a thought. So it was never a thought that we wouldn't do this, but obviously for others it is, I guess. So yeah, that's sort of how we look at that.
Yeah. And I think, there's one thing that you said there that I want to come back to, which is the safety factor. I get it. It's people who haven't, heard of Croatia or been there before. Maybe they're like, don't know what the safety level is. Me, I've traveled a lot of places in the world and I felt incredibly safe the entire time. I did not worry one little bit about I felt very, very comfortable there. Much more comfortable a lot of times than I feel in San Francisco, which is the city that I live in. So it was great in terms of that. But, over the years, you said that you've done this like 16 times and you started sort of, in the red, humble beginnings. I imagine the conference has scaled a lot over the years. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced actually organizing a growing sort of scaling conference like this?
The biggest challenges were letting go. I think that was the biggest challenge. So, in the sense of like being a conference organizer during the day or 2 days, you die because you're just talking to everyone. Everyone wants to talk to you for some good and some bad reasons. So yeah, like bad reasons, something doesn't work, something's bad. And then they're like, oh, great, it's awesome, I want to talk to you. And that will destroy your energy, right? And you have to be up. You have to be the first one at the event, and you have to be the last one at the after party. Well, not anymore. I don't do that. But it used to be like, the captain goes off last of a sinking ship, right? So you have to be the last one. You have to wake up in the morning. And when I was younger, I was probably able to do that. But to be able to do that with energy, you have to trust that. So the production team or whoever is setting up, the venue, that they will do it. But before I would stay till it was done. So I would be at the venue until, the projectors are up, the screens are up, the food, like I would check everything, that everything's there. And transitioning from me being the only one checking that to, sort of delegating it to the team, and then the team delegating it to, outside vendors. And that now you trust your vendors and you trust your team. You have to trust everyone along the way, because you can't keep, like we now have 7 stages. It'll be 95 speakers. There's no way you can keep that in your head, all of that, and still, there's a way to do that. Plus, you have to do that and be alive for the next 2 days. So actually making that transition from will it be perfect and all that to I trust these people to do the job, I think it was the hardest thing for me in the sense personal. And on the other side, the hardest thing was for like actual business perspective or self-sustainable perspective was, how do we get people to actually, how to get companies to actually sponsor the conference? Because people, I know I've read a couple of books about organizing conferences, and I actually thought about writing one because there's like 3 or whatever. There's very few and they're very light. And it's like, oh, you make a plan, you pick a date, you pick a venue, you find speakers, you find sponsors, and you sell tickets. It's like, no, that
sounds really easy.
Yeah, it's not easy. And even if you look at, so we've always been in Croatia. We've expanded across, we did multiple in Croatia, but now we're doing the first one in Miami, right? And it's the same brand, same speakers. So it's like, we have a base of speakers. Can we get speakers? Yes. Do we have a brand? Yes. Do we know the logistics? Yes. But you still have to get sponsors and attendees to arrive for them, it's a brand new conference, and that's not easy. There's no, oh, I'm going to take whatever X number of dollars and put it in whatever is social ads, and people are going to come. Like, no, that's not happening. There is hard hustle and social ingenuity that you have to do and go for people to actually respect the event, that it's like on par with some other event, that they will invest their time and money. It's not just money. Sometimes you can offer a booth for free or a ticket for free and people still won't come. So it's like they have to be willing to invest. And that was, from an organizational standpoint, the hardest thing to switch into from so small conference to a serious conference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine, what you said about like the hard thing around like letting go. Anybody who's founded any kind of company, is going to reach a stage essentially where that company scales beyond what they can keep in their head. And I think that's probably a challenge that pretty much every founder kind of goes through, where they're like, okay, I need to let go, or this isn't going to scale, or I'm going to drive myself crazy. Basically, you're going to burn out. And then I've never organized an event at the scale of Shift, but I have organized a number of events over the years. And it is a ton of work to not only do it, but to sort of push to get people there to attend. And there's always this, like, for me, panic in the back of my head that I'm going to show up on the day and nobody's going to be there, or very few people are going to be there. Has that something you've also had that level of panic?
Yeah, it's insane. So the first was the worst. The first year, everything fell apart. Like my life fell apart at that point. There was like so much, and those are private details again, but it was like horrible. And the conference, we said there was going to be like 250 people or whatever we said it was going to be. And we had 10 tickets sold. I mean, some were free or some were paid. So we're talking like 2 people paid and 8 people took free tickets, right? Like nobody. We're like, this is going to be a disaster. But we did push really hard, but we didn't know some things. And people ended up, because it was free, and even the paid people, like people make decisions very last minute. And the younger your conference is, the more last minute people will get tickets. So if your conference is a year, so it's the first year, probably the majority of people will get tickets in the last 3 days or 4 days. And so as it gets older, the conference, then it gets steadier, then it gets into plans and budgets and whatever, then that curve gets, earlier and earlier. And so with Shift, just for the Croatian one, like this year, in the sense of sold tickets, there is like every single year, if you look at the graph, like we have now sold at this time more than we've sold, like double that what we sold at that same period, the year before. And so I've had the first year, we had 10 tickets, and ended up when we opened the doors, there was a line of like 180 people or something like that. So people actually did come. And my biggest stress on that, it's always been a stress for the first like 3 or 4 years, and then sort of goes back. But I don't know if you watched the documentary of the Fire Festival.
Yes.
Yeah. So when I was watching that was like my life. So, ultimately there was a scam. So people didn't because the event wouldn't have happened, but there is a point where you're exactly the same. I forgot what the name of the organizer was. Like to create an event, you have to create hype. To create hype, you have to sell everyone. You have to tell the speakers, oh, there's going to be X amount of people. You have to sell sponsors, there's going to be X amount of people. And you're basically making this up as you go. Like there has to be thought behind it. Like I estimate because of this and that, this will happen, but you can't guarantee that these people will be here. And so you're actually telling everyone the same story at the same time and hoping that something comes out of it. It's like the chicken and egg problem, but you need to all at the same time, right? The speakers have to believe that the people are there, and the people have to believe that the speakers are there, and the sponsors have to believe that they're both there. And if you get it right, they all end up coming. But if you get it wrong, then you get a Fire Festival, right? You get nothing. So definitely, it's when I was watching that movie, it was like, oh, wow, this is horrible. And I actually felt it in my gut. So yeah, I've had it for years. It probably took like 6 years to get over the stress our people actually come to the conference. So yeah, I felt it very, very well.
Yeah, I really liked the explanation there of it really is a chicken and egg problem. Like you know, speakers aren't going to show up if they think they're not going to have an audience. Audience isn't going to show up if speakers aren't going to be there, and you can't pay for it if you don't have sponsors. And the sponsors need to believe that both of those things are going to be there. So it's like you have to sell somebody at some point in order to get that going. I think too, like I would imagine that there's going to be a huge amount of engagement at the conference this year, because I feel like what I'm seeing just from my own experience of going to conferences and also sponsoring events that, as part of my day job, is there's a huge amount of people right now that are ready to get back to conferences and in person. Like everyone has sort of Zoom fatigue. I think last year there was some of that, but people were kind of still dipping their toes in. They weren't sure, what the state of the world was, how safe it was. And now this year it's just like, open up the floodgates, like let's send everybody everywhere. And we're ready to get together. So I imagine this year it's going to, really, really be a lot of people, a lot of interest that want to come.
Yeah, I think that especially in the U.S., I felt in the U.S., well, because I travel a lot and as well as you do. But last year, a lot of the world already sort of kind of opened up and was really up and going. But I felt like the U.S. was still fairly closed last year, closed in the sense that people were still fearful. And I mean, it's totally right that they were, but I'm just saying that was the field. And so when you go to events last year in the US, they were very much at half capacity or half of what it was the year before or prior to the pandemic. But this year, it's basically, it doesn't exist anymore. Like we forgot it happened and we're all back. Yeah, I think actually So Croatia yesterday said it's the end of the pandemic officially. I didn't know that was a thing, but it was like radio and news and whatever and radio. I sound really old when I said radio right now. But yeah, he officially said it was over. So I think it's going to be a good year. I mean, I think the market correction is going to hit marketing budgets a bit.
Yeah.
But altogether, I think people are really, really now open to engage once again, to talk to people face to face.
Yeah. So you've been doing this, for a long time now, and looking back on that the variety of events that you've done, what are some of the most memorable speaker moments that you remember over the years?
My most memorable, and I always say this every single time. And if he so
of course, besides me speaking,
besides you, so that's exactly what I was gonna say. So, yeah. No, there's like to your point. I'll get into the exact ones, but what I found now, so when you're an organizer for a conference, for the most part, the interactions with the speakers, like there's not much super business that you can do. Business relationships, as you mentioned, with the speakers, because you're not building anything outside the conference, which is not the domain of the speakers. So you're probably building software in general. And so what I found is now that I'm sort of transitioning out of conferences on its own, because now that's Infobip. It's part of my team still, but it's not something I do. It's now where you can actually talk to these people, speakers, and people like yourself, where it's like, hey, I'm doing this. Does it make sense to talk about it? Or can you introduce me to this person, whatever it may be? Like the network was there, but actually when you have value to offer other people now, it's a completely different conversation. And they've known you for X, Y years. So you're like a trusted person, or trusted enough that they'll like pick up the phone and talk to you. And so I feel that that's been really beneficial over the last 2 years since I've been not running it full time, but the team has. Well, memory wise, I used to do fireside chats. I used to run them at the conference as well. And so one of the ones that stuck with me, so Justin Kahn, which is the co-founder of Twitch, among other things. And so there was just one sentence, and it was like, all you have to do is survive. Like he said, I remember this on YouTube, I'm a shitty coder, shitty marketer, shitty this, shitty that. And I just survived long enough. And they pitched whatever they not pitched, but they pivoted from a lot of things from Justin TV up until selling it for almost $1 billion. And that sort of stuck with me. And that's why the conference ended up being what it is, because I would have like shut it down way before, and other things that I've done. But basically just survive long enough and you'll eventually make your way. And so that fireside chat was actually maybe not the most inspirational. Like there's really smart people that talked about a lot of different things across the years, but something that's actually hit home for me and has stuck with me throughout the years, that's probably the most.
Yeah, I think so much of like success in business, whether that's building software and growing a company to, running an event like this, a lot of it comes down to just like a willingness to take pain for a very long time until things start to work, right? There's a lot of resilience, a lot of grit that goes into it. And essentially, what he had said, like surviving long enough to, and sort of not giving up.
Yeah, and I found that's, and you know this as well, and we won't go into the health and fitness podcast version of this, but like everything that makes sense, you have to go through pain, and that's basically it. So yeah, like if it's going to the gym, if it's like whatever it is, work, like you have to go through the pain, and sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's harder, but without going through it, you can't make it. So yeah, that's something I've learned.
Yeah, and that's there's no. We used to say when I had my startup that there's no growth without pain. But suffering is optional, or Absolutely. A choice.
Yeah. But suffering is a choice. That's a good one. Yeah, suffering is a choice.
So you mentioned, that you're now taking the conference to the U.S. in Miami, which is coming up quickly. So why bring the conference to the U.S. at this point, and how is this going to be maybe different than what the main event is in Croatia?
So I always wanted it to be an international conference. So we started in Croatia. We did 1 year. We had one. We booked one for Dublin. But the issue was it was planned for April 2020. So a few days before the World Health Organization said it was a pandemic. So that died. And we picked there because it was closer and it was less scary, I guess. But it was always a plan to go to the US. And now, as a part of Infobip, so Infobip, a lot of people don't know as a brand name, especially, but even developers, a lot don't, because the self-service option didn't exist till just a few years ago. And US is one of the biggest markets for developers. And so one of the things that I've been chartered with is helping expand throughout the US. And that sort of perfectly makes sense along with the conference, because a conference is a place where you can bring speakers and sponsors and attendees, which all can be, your partners, your customers, whatever. They don't have to be anything, but they potentially can be. And you can do it in a sort of a fun setting. And so the US was always, so Going International was always there. US was always there, but it was about the city, which one we were going to pick. And so you've been to Croatia, so it's now in Zadar. It used to be in Split, but both of them are really close, and they're both Mediterranean on the seaside, on the coastal line. And so we're picking a US city. We wanted one with the same flair, if that makes sense. So palm trees, boats, seaside or ocean, wherever we want. And we decided on Miami because of that. There's a couple of reasons. And so it feels very similar. It's bigger, but it feels similar from a lifestyle perspective. Also in the tech scene, there's people that are for and against Miami, and I don't want to get into that polarization argument, San Francisco versus Miami versus New York versus Seattle versus Austin. I don't want to get into that, but we can all say that there is more people in tech in Miami now than there was previously, or there is tech in general there. So that goes a long way. So a usual conference spot would be, let's say, Vegas. A lot of tech conferences like reInvent or whatever in Vegas. And so we didn't want to do that, but we also wanted it to be something that I've learned with creating conferences. You have something, I don't know if it's the right word, but destination event and local event. And so local event is a place where an event is held, but most of the people are locals. And a destination is where a lot of people are not local. And the difference is that if it's a local event, a lot of people will, in fact, go home at 6 p.m. or 4 p.m. or whatever it is, because they have kids and family and, obligations. But when it's a destination event, most people are like, oh, let's have fun, and then I can go to the after party, I can stay out, I can sleep in, and then go back to the conference. So we wanted it to be a destination event, or at least potential destination event, but that it has enough local people in the tech scene that can make it for a first event, sort of fill out the space. And when you add that it's sort of similar to where it's originally, but it has that same flair as the cities that we do it felt like a logical choice. So for the first year, so that's sort of why it's Miami. And so what is it going to look like? What's going to be the difference? It's going to be a smaller version of a conference for year one. So we plan, it's going to be anywhere from 500 to 1,000 people, something in that range. So the one in Croatia this year will probably be 5,000. So we're talking about, 5 to 10x larger than what is then smaller than what is in Croatia. But we're going to try to do it the same feel. So it's going to be just a rolled back version. So we're going to try the same fun things around it, but obviously some of them we won't have. And we will, and I'm saying a lot. I apologize for that. I'll try to do less of that. There you go. So the conference will have all the fun things. It will try to ensure the serendipity that happened. The speakers are the same. You're coming again. Not in a bad sense, but in a good sense, because I love the speakers that attend Shift. So it will be a smaller event, more concentrated, but it should still have that fun and event essence of meeting people. And throughout the years, we actually do think that it'll actually surpass the Croatian one. So hopefully we can do like a 10,000 person developer event in the US. So that's sort of the plan for the US, and this is sort of our first toe in the water, is the expression.
Not one I'm familiar with, but it could be. But I think it makes a lot of sense given the charter from Infobip that you were tasked with to kind of bring Infobip to the US developer market, like essentially leverage the value that you have with the conference and bring some, building essentially more brand recognition for Infobip in the United States and bring those developers together. And I do feel like it's something that's going to, grow. I don't see why you won't be at, 10,000 attendees and sometime in the near future. From a content perspective, for people who are less familiar with the speakers in the event, what kind of content can people expect at the US event?
Bro, it's all of the Shift conferences have been, they've had multiple themes. So we're not strictly, so usually with the developer conference, it will be cloud native, or it will be front end, or it'll be specifically JS or something like that. We try to create an event that can change over the years and can be different at the same time. So what we do is we look at general trends in the developer ecosystem, what's happening now, and then what we find is most interesting, we add that to the event. So I'll give you an example for Croatia, which you have been. So we have a main stage which will probably have more evergreen topics or super cutting edge topics, but high level. So you want, probably this year we'll have an opening keynote, something with AI. I'm guessing I feel that it'll still be hot in a couple months. But we have smaller and breakout stages, where one will be, Web3 software development, or it will be cloud native, or it will be specifically mobile development, or specifically something else. So it has different stages for different themes because we want to connect all these developers together. And also when you do something that size, it's hard to stay very niche in one theme. So using that as a blueprint in Croatia, in the US, we will also have multiple themes. It is a one-day event with one stage. So we will try to make the themes sort of flow together. So probably lighter at the beginning. And I don't know if the final agenda is up, but it will then try to be, if it's cloud native, then there'll be a couple of cloud native. If it's a bit of front end and a couple of front end, so that you're not, jumping back and forth, but so that it has sort of a flow from beginning to end. Because even though it's just one stage in one event, we still wanted to get that width of population and sort of put down our anchor that this is what it's going to be in the future. But as it grows, we'll split those out into their own stages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, at the beginning, we talked about, so kind of moving a little bit away from Shift, I had mentioned that you're also, CEO of Codeanywhere, the CDXO of Infobip. And I guess I feel like a natural question, I'm sure you get it all the time. I feel like I've asked you this before, but how do you balance all of these responsibilities? Do you actually sleep?
There is no balance. No, so in the sense of balance, and I think the balance is, and this is a health podcast for us again. So I try to do that 7-8 hours of sleep a day, and that's the only thing I have balanced throughout the day. Everything else I balance out across larger blocks. So I'll basically work Sunday till Saturday for 7 days a week for 3 months or 4 months or whatever it is, and then I'll take 2 weeks off or whatever it is. So I do it in that manner, and that's the only way you can, I think, do all these things. Because right now you and me are talking, and we're having this podcast. It's great, and then there's probably you and I both have calls after this, and then you have a bunch of email, and then you actually have to do concentrated work at some point. So they usually do that over the weekends. But I don't have children yet, so that also helps with that. So I don't know how you do it, and I have one on the way. So we'll see how we'll be able to balance all those things when that changes.
And I know you are also into having a pretty consistent fitness, a focus on fitness as well. Is that something that you feel like is also key to your performance? Your ability to work efficiently and focus?
I think that helps out mostly with the emotional roller coaster that is running all these things. So sort of throughout the day, so you have good days and bad days. You've had them, I've had them, a lot of us have had them. A lot of us have them every single day. And sometimes there's more bad days in a row. But when you have that balance that you will sleep, you will wake up, the new day will come, and you have enough time to recharge, at least those 7-8 hours in between, it sort of balances you out that you don't go completely off the rail, off your rims, I guess the word is. Done that historically. We've probably been, when you're younger, you probably work without sleeping for a while and do all these things, but you're then very much emotionally unbalanced, and you can go either super high or super low, whatever it is, and then you can't work very well, or you quit, or you stop, or something frustrates you too much. But when you have that, it sort of keeps you inside of a barrier, which is like, it doesn't go too bad or doesn't go too high, and you're sort of inside of that. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but
yeah, I imagine like, part of the value is that, if you're doing something physically strenuous, it forces you to essentially stop thinking about that, growing to-do list. So it gives kind of your brain a rest the same way that you might get from sleep. So that's kind of maybe how you restore that balance.
And also you have an anchor. I don't know if you've noticed that, is like when you have a very daunting task or issue, your usually mind is blocked into like, if I don't do that or if I don't make it, I'll die, whatever it is, like super bad. But when you're doing that strenuous thing every single day or every 24 hours, that's happening afterwards. So whatever happens, however sort of bad, like that strenuous thing is afterwards. So what you said is absolutely correct, but you also have this that whatever happens, time will pass. So I'll get to that next thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes back to our conversation about you just need to survive, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
So, as we start to wrap up here, what's sort of next for the Shift conference? Like, what are you thinking about there?
So growth, I think. So we have a lot of interest from the company internally to do it at other places or other continents specifically, which I think is amazing, but also crazy at the same time. So very daunting task. And one thing people like organizing, back to your issue, is like you get stressed out will people arrive. So for the Croatian one, I don't have that. For the Miami one, it's like the numbers are good, so there'll be people, will be fine now, but it's not easy breaking into a new market, into new culture, into new everything, as well as born and raised in Canada as well. So like US isn't that different. I mean, it's different, but not that different. But now going to Latin America or Southeast Asia and doing it, that's a whole other ballgame. So doing something at high quality and where you can create, and sort of to say, to create those serendipitous occurrences, you have to also understand the culture of the majority of the people that are at your event. And so there is things that go across cultures, but there are things that are specific to cultures as well. So it's a lot harder than just let's go out and build this event somewhere else. Like others have failed, large events have failed going out to places where they're not aware much about the culture. So growth in the sense of more locations, more event will surely happen. But I also think the ones that are here, our flagship event is the one in Croatia, but it's still not where I wanted it to be. Like when I close my eyes, imagine the perfect event, it's still not there. And what I mean is like still like some speakers I still haven't gotten that I wanted to get, like production value still isn't like as high as I want it. I probably will never get production as high as I wanted, but I digress. There was a conference in Vienna that doesn't no longer exist. It was called Pioneers. They were super cool. They did it in the Hofburg Palace, and they had like DJs and light shows, and they had mountain bike, like crazy drivers doing loops on stage. And it was just like insane. I like that. And so I don't think we'll get to the point that it makes any sorts of financial sense to do that. But like getting pretty close to what I want on that end would be ideal. So yeah, getting some more of the speakers and getting that production value where I wanted in that event. And there's some other things that I would like to incorporate into the event that I haven't yet. Those are so, but I feel it's all more fine tuning now than actually, like if you look at a curve of growth, it's getting to those point of diminishing returns. Like these are things we want to like get better. So it's the quote unquote perfect event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like is essentially 90% of the way there good enough while you can go and focus on other things, like how much optimization do you really need to deliver sort of more ROI for the event at this point? Probably not that much, but maybe personal ROI.
I think it's more personal. Like I don't think anyone will notice, someone that comes to the event, like the difference is it's like good enough, fun enough, whatever it is but it's more. And I think that's the crazy part when you were the owner, founder, whatever you want to call it, like you want it more personally than anything else. Like most people wouldn't notice it and don't notice it, but you want it for you. But I guess that's why it's an enjoyable conference, because we try that as hard as we can.
Right. Yeah. You're always going to see all the little flaws and imperfections more so than anybody else. But it's probably that, drive essentially to make it perfect that also makes it a great event. So, well, anyway, Aiden, I want to thank you so much for being here. I'll see you in person very soon, so I'm excited about that. And so, thanks also so much for including me in so many of the Shift events over the past year. They're always very well run, as we talked about, and fun to attend. And I recommend, of course, anyone listening that you should definitely check them out. But thanks again for being here, and cheers.
No, thank you. And I thank you for being so supportive. You helped us with the events and outside the events. And we've also had failed little meetups, which you've helped out with as well. So I appreciate that. So yeah, thank you.
All right. Cheers.